Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show we're talking about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Supernatural as well as the latest episode of Colony. Like always, if I'm talking about something you don't want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include the time slots of when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So for example, if you want to hear what I have to say about this week's episode of Supernatural, you can skip to what I had to say about this week's episode of Colony. Well, the first thing we're going to talk about is this week's episode of Supernatural. This episode kind of started off picking up where last week's episode left off about Mary kind of spilling the beans about working with the British men of letters. And an interesting conversation came up. Obviously, there's been a whole situation where Mary's been like, I need time to kind of get readjusted to being your mom again. But it never crossed my mind to think of the situation being vice versa. And like, Dean kind of brings it up. As like, well, the fact of the matter is we're trying to you need to learn how to be a mom. We need to learn how to be your kids again. And it's like, right. Because I forget, because the thing is, Mary's struggling to be a mom, but they don't really know how to be children to her because the fact is they don't know Mary at all. Dean's the one who had the most experience with her, and even that wasn't that much. Sam was like a baby at the time, and Dean was like 4 years old when she originally died, so it's not like they even really got to know her. And I doubt, obviously, John had his issues. He loved his children, but I'm sure he wasn't necessarily the most warming dad. Just because, dealing with the loss of his wife and trying to prepare his children out, trying to get his revenge, but also preparing his children for, the craziness that is this world with all these supernatural creatures and everything. Like I said, it just brought up a fascinating thought that I'd never really, thought of myself, but it makes kind of perfect sense. It's a situation where it's more so than anything, yes, it's because she's working with the British men of letters, but also because she liked it, her face is about it, especially when they find out, it's like, oh yeah, how long have you been working for him? It's like, oh, a couple months, because it was before the whole Ramiel situation. It's like, really? Dude, Cass almost died, and you got another hunter killed, Wally, so it's like, she's like, yeah, I live with that I always have nightmares, of him dying and stuff like that. I'm remembering his face and everything. Dean's like, good. Kind of a situation where when you make a mistake, you need it to haunt you. That's a good thing for it to haunt you, I guess is how Dean's putting it. But, once again, it's a situation where Mary's just doing this because, in her mind, it's like, this is the right thing to do because the men of letters, they're going to get rid of this whole supernatural world so that we never have to be a part of it anymore. Obviously, everyone's got their reservations about it. Dean and obviously Sam. Like I said, Sam understands more so than anyone why being pissed at him. He was literally tortured by him. Even Dean brings it up to Mr. Catch later on in the episode being like, yeah, the fact is one of your operatives almost tried to kill me. Interestingly, we find out that basically that lady in particular and Mr. Catch actually dated, which Dean was kind of like, yeah, no surprises there. But also got brought up as the fact is that Dean calls Sam out for being always in the middle about a situation. And that is how Sam has always been throughout the entire series. He always tries to take the middle ground when it comes to certain things, especially, when it came to their dad, when it came just to anything in general. Like the examples he used was like Castiel. Now this whole situation is because Sam doesn't this is his family. He doesn't want to choose sides in this situation. He wants his family as a whole. He wants his mom and he wants his brother. He doesn't want to compromise that. So he tries to stay in the middle, stay neutral, try to see both sides of the argument so that he can because he's always been the more, I guess you could argue the most rational of his family, I guess to a certain extent. Because I guess you could argue John was always very thick-headed. It seems like Dean kind of shares that. It seems like Mary might be that way too. Mary's kind of set in her own ways, but that's not arguably her fault. It's just kind of like this is a new life she has to get readjusted to. Because it's like, that's the question. Who would Mary be if she wasn't around to be there for her kids? Would she necessarily be the same person or not? Because it's something that Mr. Ketch brought up in this episode when he was trying to talk to Dean and everything. Because basically Mick was like, yo, the fact that you got Mary and everything, that's awesome. But the older, the top heads of the British men and letters are like, yeah, we need Sam and Dean. Because if they can get Sam and Dean, the famous Winchester brothers, all other hunters will follow. It's like, oh, Sam and Dean are behind us? After everything they've been doing for years upon years, all the things they've tackled, if they're behind these guys, then we are behind them too. So it's that type of situation. But also it's like, you can't deny having them on your side won't hurt your reputation either, because it's like, oh, Sam and Dean Winchester, who've stopped the apocalypse on more than one occasion, which you could argue, once again, is like, oh, they created it, which to be fair, they were forced in those particular situations. I mean, because it's a situation where it's like I bring it up. Well, I don't know if I brought this up before, but it's like the British men of letters act like they were so good and dating. It's like you're so much better than American hunters and everything. It's like during these apocalypse situations, why do you wait until now to interfere? To act like you're. I see you last season during the Morrow situation. Didn't see you all those years ago when Lucifer came to Earth and it was about to be a showdown between him and Michael. Didn't see you going anywhere then and there. I'm pretty sure I brought this up in the past episode, but kind of using that as an example. That whole situation was set up before for Sam and Dean long before they were even born. They were destined for that situation. For Lucifer to have Sam's body as a vessel and Michael to have Dean as a vessel. It's just kind of how things were always meant to be. Nevertheless, the point I was bringing up, I completely got off book here, was the fact is that Mr. Ketch brought up the fact is that him and Dean are very similar. The fact that they get a little antsy when they don't have something to punch. Like the fact of the matter, Dean's not the most forthcoming about his feelings, but for him, it's just like as long as he's got something to punch or hit, he's good. So kind of, even Mr. Ketch going as far as being like, we're both killers. We need something to hunt, something to kill. It's the only way we can kind of like satiate our anger and stuff like that. Which I guess I can kind of see. That's usually how Dean deals with most situations anyway. It's like, let's go hunt something. That's like anytime he's confused, conflicted, hurt, angry, it's like, let's hunt something. And that's always his way of handling things. But even with the way of him being like that, he's still, at least in my opinion, he's better than Mr. Ketch because Mr. Ketch doesn't care about anyone. I mean, there's that whole situation with that vampire girl. Like, basically, he put his knife down. He started punching her repeatedly in the face, which even Dean had to step in and be like, yo, I'm not going to let you go, but I can make it a quick death. It's like, you were going to extend that and everything. And it's like, even though she's a vampire, he has his own problem with monsters in general and everything. Which, over the course of the series, they've made exceptions to monsters on more than one occasion. They kind of let people they know or slightly associated with who were quote unquote monsters and let them go. So that's always kind of interesting to me how they feel about the whole situation. Because the fact is, it kind of got brought up in this episode because this whole episode deals with vampires and stuff. It's like, for one, Sam and Dean have come across some reasonable vampires in the past. I mean, one said particular vampire in Dean's case is Benny, which we haven't seen. I think the last time we saw Benny was season 8, right? Like when they originally got out of Purgatory. There was that hunter, that old man hunter that they killed because it was one of those things that divided Sam and Dean. Dean was very defensive about Benny. What Benny was in the right to kill that dude because he was threatening Benny's granddaughter, but nevertheless, I don't think Benny's popped up subsequently since. Maybe he has, and I'm just not remembering. So, but then on the other side, we have Mary trying to bring Sam into the whole situation, kind of showing it's like, oh, this is the British man of letters way, like facility and everything, but it's like a very low grade facility. It's just kind of like them trying to get started. It's a very high tech place and everything. And everything seems like it's going according to plan. Basically, their plan is to wipe out. Basically, they wipe out a lot of vampires in the Midwest. Then basically, they'll kind of funnel them to one particular spot, kind of wipe those out, kind of those remainers out. And basically, they do a situation where they basically sit back, watch, and study them. They don't go in guns and blazing like most hunters do. Which, to be fair, it's an argument that I didn't hear Sam bring up. It's like, well, the fact of the matter is while you're studying, watching, and waiting, who's to say they don't kill anyone? But maybe by the time they come upon them, they make sure that it's, they come upon them. They try to make sure that once they've caught them, they don't go after anyone. It's like if they've already caught someone, it's like we let them finish that meal. But like I said, it's a situation where the man of letters is like, hey, the hunters get there late. We kind of show up there before. Our point is kind of be there before there's any victims. So, but things don't go according to plan when the Alpha gets involved. Which I've got to learn that actor's name because I see him in plenty enough stuff. CW wise, he was on maybe that was last season. I think last season maybe. He played Bonnie's dad in a couple episodes of The Vampire Diaries. I think that was last season. But, currently he plays Henry the Dean on The Magicians. Why I also pick it, because he's one of those actors that has a very good voice. Kind of like Keith David. He has that good voice that you're like, man, I wish I had a voice like that. That's a good voice. But he pops up again, which subsequently, apparently, I was wondering when I was seeing this, and Sam kind of brings it up, is like, oh yeah, we crossed paths with him like 5 years ago. I was like, right. This is the last time he popped up was like season 6, because that was like, basically he was kind of a key component in the whole, like, what eventually would turn into the whole Leviathan situation, if I remember correctly. He ended up being a key component to that or whatever. So, it's a situation where he kind of gathered his children up. Basically, one of the guys inside of the organization actually sold them out. He's actually someone that was on the Alpha's payroll, because basically he gets paid to do, keep an eye on things for him. So, said actor, I brought this up in the Blacklist episode I recorded earlier, because I talked about the fact that I would later on be talking about it. But I know him in particular from Hemlock Grove. Now, if you don't know anything about Hemlock Grove, it's a Netflix show. He played the sheriff in it, and he had this basically the show's a supernatural horror series, and it has like a supernatural monsters type aspect with it. Vampires and werewolves, without going into too heavily of spoilers. So I just thought it was kind of interesting. You're in this episode with vampires, and you're in a show that kind of dealt with vampires. It's a whole thing. It's just interesting casting, It's always funny when you can make comparisons like that, but nevertheless, well, to be fair, in the show, they don't necessarily call them vampires. In Hemlock Grove, they call them Oopiers, which is basically just, I forgot what language that's actually from, but basically it essentially is the same thing as a vampire. It's just a different word in a different language for it. Nevertheless, he sold them out, and basically a lot of the people there got killed. It kind of brings up again the situation comparing a British men of letters to a hunter. The fact is that none of them had ever really wielded a weapon before. None of them had ever killed anything before, because, it was a situation where they're more kind of behind the books type of people. Yes, they know this information. They might have an encyclopedic knowledge of certain things, but they don't actually, get well trained. At least, there's some agents I can see with Mr. Catch. He's kind of supposed to be the muscles. He's supposed to be the muscle so that no one else has to be. So it seems like amongst their team, the only ones that were the muscle of the group was Mr. Catch and Mary, which is kind of another reason why they're trying to bring Sam and Dean in, because it's like after everything they've gone up against, all the supernatural things they face, it's like they will be a great addition to their squad. Like they'll kind of bulk up their numbers, kind of increase their odds. But it was kind of interesting why the Alpha did what he did, showing up now, because he was like, basically the British men of letters has kind of caused him some problems. He brings up the fact is, he's like, yeah, I know all about you. I've heard about what you were doing in England, and I never cared. You know why? Because, well, it was England, but now you stepped here in my home turf, that being the U.S., and it's like, I don't appreciate that. Now you cause some problems. But there was even a conversation between Sam and him being like, Sam is like, he's like, no, we can go back to the way things were. The fact of the matter is, you didn't care about us killing off one or two. It's like, yeah. And even then, they don't actively go after vampires if vampires were after other people. It's a situation where it's like, they only went after vampires out of retaliation. So kind of also, like, obviously Sam was lying so that he can get his hand on the Colt bullet. But, which I'll get to that in a second, but it was kind of a situation where it's like, there is some truth to that, because it was like, the Alpha has never really acted before now. Like, prior to season 6, I don't think he was ever mentioned or brought up before then. So, I don't know if he's even a well-established thing amongst vampires. I guess the older vampires will know about him, maybe the younger ones won't. But it's a situation where they were able to put the Alpha down, which he commended Sam on being very clever, using the Colt bullet on him, kind of starting that fight with Mick just so he could get his hands on a bullet. What's kind of sad about that situation is the fact is that they brought him back for this one episode just to kill him off. Then again, maybe it's a situation where it's like, okay, they just want to maybe they're setting this up because it's like, oh, we're taking out the main head vampire with this whole situation of trying to wipe out all vampires. It's like you dealt a serious blow to the supernatural world, at least amongst vampires, by taking out the Alpha. Granted, we don't know what that might mean for the other vampires. Once again, it comes down to how many people actually know about the Alpha and how many who actually care. Can they actually feel something now that he's gone? And is he permanently dead? He said that, like, oh, the Colt is... I'm one of the 5 things that Colt can't kill, but it seems like it killed him. What I was halfway expecting was him to kind of, like, basically his body be... Like, obviously they turned their back on him or something, and then all of a sudden he rises up because it didn't actually work on him, and he disappears. Turns out not to be the case, at least to our knowledge. So, like I said, it just sucks they brought him back for one episode just to kill him off, but... What can you do? But now we find ourselves in a very interesting situation because now even Sam's kind of willing to work with the British men of letters. Like I said, I brought it up last episode. The fact is they don't know everything that, in Mr. Ketch's case, all the stuff he's done kind of quote unquote cleaning things up behind them. So they don't know all about that. So I am curious to see how they will react when they find this out. I mean, maybe, Sam's kind of all for it. He's like, yeah, I'm going to try and talk to Dean about it. And Mary's kind of all on board, but now the last person they got to convince is Dean, which Dean might use this as an opportunity to be like, hey, maybe use this as a chance to spy on them, kind of find out what they're really all about. Are they really on the up and up like they claim to be? As we've seen with their own personal experience, they're not necessarily on the up and up with all the torture and trying to kill them and everything. But then it does come back to the situation with Mr. Ketch because Mick is like, the fact is you weren't here to do your job. He's like, the fact of the matter is on the front lines, there are people who die. It's like, oh, well, another day, and just kind of moves on, not really caring. So it's a situation where it's like, hunters actually have this camaraderie of like always having each other's back when the time is necessary. But in this particular case, it's like, Mr. Catch doesn't care. Like for him, all it is about killing, which for Dean, it's not like that. He has people he cares about. Like he rushed back to help the British men of letters, mainly because he knew his mom would be there and he wanted to help her out. So it's like, it came to a situation where Dean was also being like, yeah, I get it. You're a mom and everything, but you're also a fully grown woman, and I'm not a child anymore, so I shouldn't be acting like one. It's like, and it's understandable. Once again, he missed out on the childhood with having a mom, so there's a part of you that's like, oh, I just want you to be a mom, but it's like, no, she's a grown woman. She has to make her own decisions. I may not agree with them, but the fact is I have to respect the fact is that they're your decisions. I am very curious to see where the whole cult situation lies. It seems like even the men of letters didn't know about the whole bullet situation. I'm like, I'm not making that up, right? They made bullets for the cult in the past, right? It's been so long. I definitely remember when they originally ran out of bullets. I think the last bullet they used on Yellow Eyes, didn't they? They were original bullets from the cult, and then they made some because they even brought it up in this episode. Bobby's the one that actually found the spell or whatever to turn other bullets into cult bullets that can be fired. So it was gathered for the men of letters, but what does that mean? Will they be keeping it? Will Mick have access to it? Will it be sent back to Europe? I don't remember it all. I completely forgotten about the cult because it's been that long since they used it. So it kind of threw me for a loop seeing it pop up again. But overall, a very good episode. Very interested to see what goes on next episode. And now moving on to this week's episode of Colony, which was a crazy episode on so many levels. From one side, you have Broussard and Katie trying to track down the boy that Will let escape from that Red Hand house from before, because he's the only person that can identify. Obviously, they will eventually break him, and if he ends up breaking, he'll eventually reveal the information that, it was Will that actually let him get away. So that's going to be the whole thing. So mainly it's about covering his tracks. But also, they also look at this as an opportunity. It's like, hey, if we can help him out, maybe we could be in good terms with the Red Hands. Which the boy himself is like, I'm not actually going back to the Red Hands. He could have the moment he ran, but the reason why is because he brings up a good point. He's like, if he had gone back, they would have killed him because he is a loose end. More so than anything, if he told them like, oh no, I just happened to escape, they won't believe him because they were like, oh, how is it that you, out of everyone else is dead, but then you just happen to manage to survive? We did end up finding out some interesting information from him because Will ends up overhearing a conversation. It turns out, lo and behold, the person who leads this group, I don't know whether it's because the Red Hands themselves is just like a small group amongst because obviously the resistance is divided up into cells depending on, the areas, but it looks like the Red Hands may just be allocated to the LA block. Just kind of like a new subgroup that's been created just because they saw what the resistance was, so they decided to fight back, inspired essentially. Turns out the person leading the group is Karen, Frankie's mom, the girl who basically she was basically the recruiter last episode. The boy that got caught this episode, he's kind of similar situation as the boy who blew himself up, who acted as a bomb. It's that basically Frankie kind of like made him feel special. It's like he had never been with a woman before, and the fact that she told him, it's like, oh, I love you. Basically, saying all the things she needed to do to get his trust, which you could argue that's the same thing Maya did with Bram, Whether there's legit feelings there or not, or whether it's just it ends to a means to an end, it's kind of hard to say. At least in this particular case, Bram's situation, that might have been a little bit different, but in this particular situations, it's just a means to an end. They need soldiers, and basically they talk about the fact that they go after people who are very vulnerable. I mean, because they're not supposed to be full-blown soldiers. They're just supposed to be people that they're kind of pawns that can be used as your sacrifice. But it turns out, like Frankie was her daughter. Well, she got pissed at Will because she found out Will was a part of it. I wish Will had never said anything, or at the very least explained himself. It's like, it's not like they killed her. It's not like they did anything. I mean, it was actually Frankie who killed herself. But to be fair, it's a situation where she wouldn't have felt like she was needed to do that if they had never caught her or anything. So it's like, she'll still blame collaborators and everything, the Homeland for it and everything, because they still had a part into it. It's like, if you had never put her through all that, she would have never killed herself. Because even the part, I should have known something was up when he was like, yeah, she got drawn in by some cult. She's like, no, cults are for the weak. My girl was strong. I was like, okay, that's a little weird for you to say. I was like, okay, I'll just let that slide. It's like, no, she said that for the particular reason of like, that was her daughter. I guess she brought her into this fight. Maybe it was her daughter's will. I mean, I don't know. But, it really shocks, Will when he finds out. It's like, because he literally had the leader of this group in front of him and he didn't even realize it. I mean, it kind of makes sense. I mean, arguably, she did say, like, oh, she found this place because she thought she had heard her daughter was there. It's like, no. And the fact that she put on that sob story like that, it's like, man, once again, she can give Katie a run for her money when it comes to lying. Holy crap. Which really quickly, I'll jump to it just because I have to get to it just to kind of continue with that whole situation. But man, oh man, was I surprised when that whole Lindsay situation, like earlier in the episode in the church, Charlie's kind of being a dick, throwing the ball up and down. And I'm like, she's like, could you stop? And he's like, no, this is stupid. And then Lindsay kind of kicks on her dark side. She's like, I could tell them that you're a very misbehaved child, that basically you have this kind of aggression side of you, and it could basically take you in for some reevaluation or something like that. And you could be taken away and never see your family again. And then at that moment, Charlie just kind of calmed down. And you can see Gracie behind Lindsay with her eyes like wide, like, whoa, like, you're scaring the crap out of me. And it's like, she had this look on her face, and then she went back to smiling. It's like, holy crap, you were evil. I didn't know you had that dark side. I was like, holy crap, that kind of sent a shiver down my spine. But the point I was trying to get to is bringing up the fact is, didn't expect her dying like that, because we had Charlie looking out the window. I was like, at first I was like, okay, is this some dream or something? Is she messing with him, or is he being paranoid because of what she said or whatever? Because I was like, no, he got to went back to his douchebag ways a little bit, because he was eating an apple around her, like kind of while they're having their lessons. But she's like, but now something's wrong. He grabs Lindsay's hand. No, he grabs Gracie's hand. It's like, we gotta go now. I'm like, what's that about? And she's like, no, we gotta get back here. Door comes busting up. I was like, oh, is it going to be the Red Hats or something? What is? Nope. Bam, 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 bam. Lindsay's dead. I was like, wait, what? And it was like, the freaking Red Hands. She sent them after Will because she blames him specifically. Granted, how'd she get access to? I mean, I guess, with enough people around, you probably have eyes and ears everywhere. So she was probably able to, have someone track back where Will lived. But man, oh man, was I not expecting that. That kind of threw me for. I was like, dude, you what? Like I said, she holds such a grudge against him because she blames him specifically for her daughter dying. And so, I mean, luckily Will and Katie got back in their time and was luckily able to, Charlie and Gracie were okay. If it was not for like Charlie being so fast and realizing something was up before anyone else did, they'd all be dead right now. Because it's a situation where she would have gladly had his kids killed just to sort of point of like, oh, I lost my child. You get to lose your children too, just to kind of make a point. But it's like, man, that is some rough crap, dude. Lindsay, like I said, it's so interesting because I thought we were going to get some more character development with Lindsay, because we saw that evil side to her, and it's like, nope, immediately later on, next scene we see her and she's dead. I was like, wow. Because another kind of bouncing all over the episode, we ended up finding out, we also kind of got a little bit of the resistance side of things, where we had Simon bringing up to Morgan. He's like, apparently bringing up the fact is that him and Morgan kind of had a relationship in the past, but puts up a picture like, it's like, oh, wait, is this your mom? And it's like, yeah, but I thought your mom was in England. And it's like, apparently they got some like intelligence group that was able to get access to her. And so for Simon, he's like, what we're going to have to do is, like, the fact is all they want is that gauntlet we stole from that host. All we got to do is hand that over and we're good. Which Morgan is like, you really think they'll forgive you? Which I'll immediately say, it's a good thing Morgan didn't listen to him. At first, I was like, Morgan, don't do this. Because, you know, to him, it's like, we hand that over, we gain our freedom, we can argue. It's like, oh, we got too deep into this. But it's like, you're the one that sought out Broussard, like, last season. You went out of your way to meet up with him. You know, you want, because it's like you thought you were joining this big fancy cause, and now you realize there's so few of you. And it's now because, especially this season, put in perspective how much they have against them, with the clock counting down on them now, and the fact that seeing all those droids that were hitting in the wall like that, it just, I guess it, plus now his mom's being caught up in all this, I guess it's a situation where it kind of put things in a different perspective for him. Plus what happened to BB, it just became too much. It wasn't the glorified situation he thought it would be, like, oh, we're heroes fighting back against the alien scourge trying to take care of our planet. But my point I was about to make is, like, that's an idiotic plan. You're part of the resistance. They will take you down. They will kill you. I mean, first they'll torch you, and then they'll kill you. It doesn't matter if you return that, or even if you sold out Broussard, they'd still torch you for any more information. Maybe, maybe not. Because it really depends. Well, now that they know that the leader of the Red Hands is a woman and it's not Broussard, you know, because they were kind of labeling them all together, because it is technically two resistance groups kind of acting at the same time. But it's like they would have tortured you and eventually killed you, because it's like you're already at the top of the list already for what went down because you stole that. Like, they would have been like, we have to kill you to appease, you know, our host for what you've done. So, but luckily what happened is Morgan ended up betraying him, ended up whacking him, and then Broussard is the one that dealt the killing blow, which you see Morgan with a look on her face like, oh my god. I guess for one, it could be interpreted different ways. It could be either like, oh, the shock of like having like someone that she cared about, that was a friend of hers, killed in front of her like that. Two, that she actually had a part to play in it. Maybe it's also because she wasn't expecting Broussard to kill him, which, I mean, in a situation like this, Broussard really didn't have much choice. I'm not saying that I agree with the tactic, but it's like under their circumstances, they can't leave loose ends, and he would have been a loose end if they let him live, because there's no way you can keep him in a group knowing that he has thoughts of betraying them like that. So I guess Morgan went, because I mean, it does seem like Morgan's has more faith, because at first she was the most reluctant, but it seems like she went along with it for the purposes of catching him off guard. But it does seem like she's kind of entering Katie's like feet a little bit too, because she's like, hey, I want to learn, kind of basically, you know, like Katie learned last season, to kind of fend for herself, kind of become strong. So it seems like their group is down even more. I mean, granted, they got Katie back, but now it's like they're even less. Which Simon started talking crap. He's like, oh, the fact is that we had that whole situation with that host that time, but you came in. It's like, no, she saved your tails because they would have eventually found you. And obviously the city was being destroyed, so it was more problematic if you had kept things going the way you did. So it's like, you should be thankful for your jerk. But it's like I said, I'm sad that they ended that way, but you could already tell it was headed in that route, because he was already having problems with Broussard to begin with, because he felt like Broussard wasn't the leader that they signed up to join up with. It's like, because basically they're down to these small numbers. And like I said, it's not the group that he was originally part of, because all of them are dead. The only person from the original group left is Katie. So. And then on the other side of things is the Bram situation, where you have Snyder confronting him, and Snyder's like, okay, Bram, so this is what's going to go down. You're going to tell me who's behind this. Not for like, oh, for the sake of like trying to get a clear conscience or whatever. It's like, the fact of the matter is, I'm not even going to punish you as like the person who runs this labor camp. What's going to happen is, the fact of the matter is, what you did was stupid. The people you got mixed up with are stupid too, because now the Raps are going to be super pissed and they're going to kill us all. Either you let them kill some. Basically, he's thinking about, let's cover it all up. Let's make it all disappear. Even burning that guard's body that died last episode that they killed. Covering up all things that would be like, oh, that basically all those backlash, all the problems from the explosion, everything like that happened last episode was connected to this. They tried to, like, you know, sweep it under the rugs. It's kind of what he was trying to go through. So he's like, okay, it's up to you, Bram. Either some people die, these people who are associated with this, and you spare everyone else's life, or we all die. And so Bram decides to work with him and gives him names, but Bram kind of immediately regrets him when they're all lined up. And it's just the moment he walks up, pow! Oh, wait, this isn't the guy? I mean, the fact of the matter is, you said these are the guys. Pow! Works his way down to the third guy. He's like, oh, so you're saying it's not him? And Bram is crying. He's like, no, it's not him. I lied about it. And he's like, oh, pow, shoots him anyway. It's like, is that all there is? How do I know you're not lying now? It's once again, it's one of those situations where you have Schneider being a person that you don't necessarily take seriously, but you have moments like this where you're like, he's a ruthless person, which to be fair is a situation where it's like, he is protecting other people's lives, to be fair. I mean, more so than anything, it's protecting his own life. I mean, when he explains that to Bram later, he's like, yeah, my life was in danger as well as other people's lives in danger, which is a situation where it's like, in his mind, it's like, it's a necessary sacrifice. Sacrifice the few so that you can save the many. And it's like, yo, so basically, I want you to remember that not just me, you helped kill these guys too. And if you want to honor them, basically honor them by keeping your mouth shut and living your life. Basically, keep up this false pretense that nothing went down at this facility. And when he gets there, like he's trying to get everything all ready up, and Helena steps by and everything. And he's like, okay, got it all cleared up. And she's like, let's go, Schneider. He's like, wait, what do you mean? She's like, get in the car, Alan. He's like, no, I cleared everything up for you. I cleared up everything. She's like, Alan, get in the car. And then he's like asking to bring Bram along. She brings Bram along, and they drive away. It's like, wait, they're not. And then, boom, the facility's gone. They almost use like a shockwave, and it even destroys some of the buildings that they're driving by, which, like, from a special effects standpoint, looks pretty awesome. And granted, in the context of the things, it's like, that's not awesome at all. But man, does that suck. Because it kind of goes back to the beginning of the episode. Helena was talking to these different proxies, because the fact of the matter is, like, what are we going to do about the situation? It's like, they can't necessarily blame us for what went down. It's like, well, they blamed us for less. And there was that one particular proxy that's like, oh, well, we can spin this and make it in a positive way. He's like, oh, we can make it be like, get people to think, oh, it's part of the greatest day, kind of that religious angle, which Helena was kind of like, no, let's not do that, because all we're going to do is kind of, we don't know what kind of ramifications that would have in the future. Granted, he went along with it anyway, so I don't know whether this was necessarily part of that or not. Like, was this them trying to hit back because it's like, oh, you're lying and saying this whole, like, who created the greatest day religion anyway? Was that something that the hosts are? I feel like they wouldn't care about you worshiping them, because all you are kind of cattle to them. They're like, as we know, as last episode set up, the fact is they're planning on wiping you all out. You're just labor force for them anyway. So it's like, would they really care? But in a way, when you actually look at Alan's situation, it makes you wonder. It's like, technically, all of that, all they did was for nothing. Because at the end of the day, only 2 people walked away from that camp. I don't even think all the Red Hats escaped, did they? Maybe they did, because they probably got some advance notice. But it's like, the only reason why Alan knew was because he knew at that moment, but maybe some of the Red Hats went with him. Nevertheless, all the people that were in that prison were gone. I mean, I guess lucky for Bram in a twisted sense of the way, like anyone he was associated with is already dead. So the only person he cared about died last episode, so... But now we have him in a very particular situation, because he's like, now he's seeing kind of the ugly side of collaborating, in a sense of like, the fact is that Alan was willing to sacrifice and let so many people die. But I mean, at the same time, it means saving other people. It's like, this is what I worked for. This is also what your dad works for. This is what everyone works for. I'm not one of those people who has that little glimmer of hope that we can fight back against this. I'm a realist, and I'm accommodating myself to this situation, basically saying you should do the same thing. And now Bram has to live with all that they were involved in. And like I said, once again, it amounted to nothing at the end of the day, because the whole facility went up. So I wonder, will Bram say anything to anybody about it? Most likely not, but it does make you wonder where his mindset's going to go forward. Because obviously we have Will kind of being on the fence, I'm sure, about this whole Red Hand situation. I mean, he's working with the Resistance. That's more so out of his own survival. But, it's not like he 100% believes in a collaboration either, because it's like, especially the way they handle things. And kind of going back to the Simon point, especially with this group of people working at Homeland, they definitely wouldn't have helped him out. They definitely would have tortured him and killed him immediately afterwards, because they don't know. There's no way. If not, they would have done worse and probably shipped you off to the factory, which some people would look at that as worse than dying. But there was a heartwarming moment. At first, I was sad, because it's like, oh, because of that whole situation at the Bowman house, they got relocated. I was like, oh, Bram just missed him. But it's like, nope, he gets relocated with his family. It's like, he's there, they're hugging, even him and Charlie hug. So it's like, the Bowman family is reunited again. But things are definitely going to get interesting going forward. I really want to know, is it because of what that proxy dude said about the whole greatest day being this being part of that whole situation? Or is it just because they did trail it back? They're like, no, there's no forgiveness. We're destroying it. Which actually shows you how much Helena actually does care about Alan. She actually does like him, because she even said that last season. She's like, I'm sorry this is happening to you, Alan. I actually like you. Which she wasn't lying, because she didn't have to go out of her way to save Alan like that. She really didn't have to, but she did, so. Because no matter how much you look at it, Alan is very tactful in the way he handles situations. Like, obviously, there is tact to his messed up notions. Like I said, I don't 100% agree with him, but you can understand where his notions are coming from and why he does the things he does. It's kind of ends justify the means. It's for the greater good. It's like, yeah, a few people have to die so the greater amount can survive. So, a crazy episode. I'm so interested to see where everything goes from here. Especially now that Will knows who runs the Red Hands. I wonder, will he sell Karen out, or will he have a meeting with her or whatever? I mean, because the fact is, he might sell her out, because the fact is, it's like she put a target on his family's back, and it's like there is no forgiving that. Especially now that he's got his entire family back, he's going to be fighting tooth and nail to keep them safe. Really, that's all I wanted to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.